there's an awful lot of, well, here's the spec. And by the way, don't change the spec once you sign off on it. And so the customers try to put everything they can think of into the spec because they don't get to change it. Not that they need it, but that it, you know, it's tough for them to figure out what they need, so they put all sorts of stuff in. So we get great big systems, or we have a system, we don't know how it works, but we add a few more things, kind of ignore what's there. So there's a lot of computer systems around here that don't really have, that the features that are in them are not fundamental to the system, not stuff that people use a lot. And the problem is, as the systems get more complex, the cost goes up that way, okay? It's not just a little bit, it's pretty much exponential. So if you don't have simple systems, if you constantly increase the complexity with stuff that people don't need, you're not doubling or tripling the cost. You're driving the cost up 10, 20, 30 times instead. So the most important thing, I think, in software development is to figure out how to put fewer features into the code. And don't even take customers at face value that say, oh, I want this. If you understand the system and if you understand the technology, you should be in a position to think about how can I challenge that request for a feature. It doesn't make sense. They aren't going to want it. So the biggest way to get more productive, I think, in software development is to just plain write less code. Okay? Now, up until now, I don't know if you guys do this, but up until now, many places have measured software productivity based on lines of code per hour or lines of code per person. You ever hear that? Or function points, right? And how much sense does that make if the worst thing you can do is put in function points? I mean, those are not good things. The more function points, the worse the software is. On a relative measure, doing the same thing, well, even then, you want fewer function points to accomplish the same objective. So those kinds of local productivity measurements that are very typical in software development are bad measurements because they encourage us to put in too many lines, to put in more lines of code, to put in more function points because that's good. But a really good development team will take out function points and will take out lines of code, you know, negative productivity. But that will create a code base that can be dealt with over the time, you know, in the future. So I think one of the really big ways that we see is putting too much junk into the code. Any disagreement? I'm nuts, right?
How to convince customers that
There you go. That's always the question. How do you convince customers that they're wrong? I was trying to see if in the room here, there were a couple people in my class, the last 2 days, and they said, well, we knew our customer was wrong. They were causing us to put in all these extra things that we knew was slowing things down. So one day, we forgot to build them in. I mean, it was a mistake. And 2 months later, the customer noticed that they weren't there. And he said, oh, but they have to be there. And they said, yeah, well, you remember 2 months ago when the site usage started doubling? Well, guess what? That's when we still come out and the response time increased. So it was interesting because this is really the first time I had come to a contracting firm that has actually gotten pretty good at convincing their customer that they don't really need all of that stuff that they're asking for.
Yeah,
So,
but they need to write them first.
What?
They need to write them first. You write
It was a matter of, yeah, it was, yes, but they got it out fast too because they stuck it over in the corner. So, it is true that you don't always have control of it, but it's also true that as much as you might have control of it, you should try to take control of it and be involved in figuring out what goes into the code. Not have people tell you, but be involved in advising technically what's good, what are good approaches, so that you have the capability to write clean, simple software. I really believe that it's important for technical people and testers to be involved in figuring out what should be in the code, what features should be in the code, so that they have a really good feel and a really good influence into not putting in extra features. But also, it's not always customers' fault, okay? Let's be honest. Sometimes we encourage customers to give us this long list. Hey, it's a fixed price contract after all, and that's the only way you can protect yourself. And so they have to give us a long, long list, and we don't even determine ahead of time if they're fundamental or not. And that long list of stuff against which we write a sign-off in the contract turns out to create bad behavior because the customers want to put as much stuff in as they can so that they can, negotiate later on what they really want or something like that. So we got to get over that, and we have to get into the practice of what's the process to build this first? Just the 20%. Now, admittedly, it requires a good collaborative relationship with whoever it is you're building it for, but it's really best to build the 20% first that you really need, and then add some more and add some more until you run out of time or money or something like that. Yeah?
How does it relate to manufacturing? You cannot remove features from a car.
The way it relates...
And you don't have...
No. In manufacturing, it's slightly different. We're dealing with information in manufacturing, and we're dealing with parts, not cars. So what used to happen in Detroit is they had these great big stamping machines. They were like, way as big as this room. It took them 3 weeks to change a die. So say you want to stamp out a door, If it takes 3 weeks to change the die, then they're going to stamp out thousands of those doors before they go on to the next one. And then they're going to stamp out thousands of the other side, and then thousands of fenders. So they would create big batches of parts that they didn't need way ahead of time, instead of just making the stuff that they need right now. That's what Ono meant when he said, T.G. Ono meant when he said, making stuff that isn't needed. Any in-process inventory that you don't need right now, that you're going to need in the future, is waste. That's what it means in manufacturing. And if you think of in-process inventory as knowledge, anything that you don't need to decide, make detailed decisions on now, that you can wait until you have more knowledge, is waste. And features that you don't need are waste. Makes sense? Sort of? Handovers. Another big waste. This comes from Alan Ward. I mentioned him. He wrote the book Lean Product and Process Development. And he says that in product development, the biggest waste is handovers. And for products, I agree with him. For software, I still think it's extra features. But for products, he says a handover occurs whenever you separate responsibility, knowledge, action, and feedback. So one person decides what to do, somebody else decides how to do it, somebody else actually does it, and somebody else learns from the results. Does that sound familiar? So the problem is, at every gap, a whole bunch of knowledge gets lost, just disappears. You have in your head what's called tacit knowledge. It's more important than the stuff that's written down. And if I try to give you a book that says, here's how to ride a bike, how good is that going to be? Say I've got these grandchildren, and you can't give them a book on how to ride a bike. You have to be there with them and help them figure out how to ride a bike. Similarly, tacit knowledge can't be transmitted by pieces of paper. It has to be translated by being there and talking. So when you have different departments, one person, product marketing, for example, decides what to build, and somebody else, maybe architecture people, put the architecture together, and then a whole other team someplace else actually does the code. And finally we have a support organization way off in another place that hears from the customers all the feedback. Then all kinds of information gets lost in that process, just huge amounts. So if you're looking for a way to reduce waste, one really good approach is we'll say cross-functional team. Ways where people from all those different areas can get on a team, like people thinking about the whole system, not just the software, people thinking about the software itself, how it's going to be integrated into the overall software, how it's going to be supported. If you can put all of those people in the same team so they at least representative so that they can talk to each other, that's one way to get rid of handovers. Well, at least to mitigate handovers. You'll still have some handovers and you have to be careful about them, but handovers create a lot of waste. Lost knowledge. And Ellen Ward proposes that the essence of any product development is knowledge, gathering knowledge, and codifying knowledge in the product. And when you lose knowledge, you lose the most important ingredient for product development. Think about that. software is, you can't feel it, you can't touch it, you can hardly see it. I mean, maybe if you're a programmer, you can see it. If you're somebody else, you can't read it. And so the only thing you have really is the knowledge. And the knowledge is codified in the code. And it's the knowledge getting lost that's the biggest waste in product development. And that's one of the big ways that it gets lost, handovers.